right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Grace Waltz. I'm the Vice President of Public Policy for the Minneapolis Regional Chamber. As we get started this morning, there are a couple of housekeeping items for you. As you enter the room, you will notice that your audio and video is disabled. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen for any questions that you have. We will have time at the end of the presentation to answer those questions. And just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded and you will receive a link to the recording in your post-event email. So at their April 2021 meeting, the Minneapolis Charter Commission unanimously voted to place an amendment on the November 2021 ballot to our city charter that will clarify and define roles and responsibilities of the mayor as the chief executive officer and the city council as a legislative and policy body supported by an expanded office of auditor. This is comparable to the balance of power in our state and federal government systems and other large cities across the US. The council legislates, the mayor implements, and the council monitors the performance of city services. So to introduce our speakers today, Pat Bourne is a former Met Council Regional Administrator and former Minneapolis Finance Officer. And Penny Hunt is a former Vice President of the Medtronic Foundation and Executive Director of Robina Foundation, both from Charter for Change, which is a grassroots nonpartisan volunteer group. And so I thank them for joining us this morning with an educational presentation on the Charter Commission's amendment and the other amendments that are anticipated to be on the November 21 city election ballot. So Pat and Penny, I will hand it off to you.
Well, thank you very much. We're very happy to be here. As was indicated, I'm Penny Hunt, and I'm here with my colleague, Pat Bourne. We're representatives of Charter for Change. Thanks again for putting us on your agenda. We're a group of nonpartisan, citywide Minneapolis volunteers. I think there are about 50 of us who support the Minneapolis Charter Commission's charter amendment and who are working to educate the Minneapolis voters on the charter amendment and for the upcoming election. We have a big city election in November. In this presentation, we'll be sharing information that we think will help you make a decision on this ballot initiative. I think it's clear that our city is in crisis. The pandemic, George Floyd's killing, civil unrest, economic distress, persistent inequities, and gun violence in the recent weeks. We clearly need to transform policing, and we need a city that works for everyone. The Charter Commission's proposal provides, we think, a path to create just that, a city that is just, safe, and that works for everyone, with a police department that is reformed, not eliminated, and a city government that is more responsive, effective, and accountable. Here's a video showing with a number of our city leaders and what they have to say about this.
Changes to the charter are long overdue. Our governance structure is unnecessarily complicated, and it's difficult for citizens and our administrative staff to navigate. And this causes the line of authority and accountability to be unclear. A city council member is elected to represent the unique needs of the citizens in their ward. The mayor is elected citywide and is responsible to advance a shared agenda affirmed by the citizens and benefiting the entire city. Now, I've held both these positions, and I know firsthand how those lines can and have been blurred and undermined. Now, I'm a strong believer in shared power and authority, but it's time to state clearly and succinctly in the city charter that the mayor is the chief executive authority in the city and that the city council has legislative authority. I believe the mayor, who is elected citywide, should have the authority to appoint all of the city department heads for a period of time consistent with the mayor's 4-year term, and that the city council should maintain the right to approve or reject those nominations. Minneapolis does not need 14 mayors. Minneapolis needs 1 chief executive and 13 strong city council members with legislative responsibility and authority.
Our city needs a strong executive, the mayor. When I was the city's finance officer, I saw numerous occasions where city council members gave confusing directions and requests to my fellow city leaders. It was confusing, expensive, and time-consuming. This is not the way our city should be led.
Hi, I'm Don Samuels. I'm former council member in the city of Minneapolis for 3 terms, a resident of the 5th Ward, and where I was a council member, and where Sandra and I raised 3 girls, and a couple of our girls from birth to college. So I've lived in the community for a long time and experienced the disparities of our community and experienced the challenges of city government, especially to deliver services and resources to communities like mine. It's hard to get things done in the city of Minneapolis. People complain a lot. Why is it so easy to get things done in St. Paul and not Minneapolis? The answer is really simple. Minneapolis city staff has 14 bosses. That means the mayor and 13 council members. So to get anything done, you have to persuade the mayor and 7 council members to get a majority to get anything done. Now that makes day-to-day execution of policy and decision-making for departments very, very slow, tedious, and sometimes impossible. But when it comes to an emergency, an urgent situation, which requires a quick response, where it's not a month-by-month decision, but an hour-by-hour decision to make our communities safe, then 14 bosses is absolutely ridiculous. And it leads to problems in decision-making and hesitation and inefficiencies that cost lives and eventually lead to great disparities between one community and another. And we saw that at play in 2020 after George Floyd was killed, when decisions had to be made around public safety as the riots started to increase across the city, and especially in my community where most of the violence has happened and is still happening. To take that back is going to be a painful and difficult process, and the City Charter Commission is trying to help us by changing the charter to give more authority to the mayor and more authority over city department heads as any other mayor. Minneapolis is called a weak mayor system vis-a-vis a strong mayor system. It's really not that. It's a weak mayor system vis-a-vis a regular mayor system. And what we want is a regular mayor, not a strong mayor, a regular mayor like other cities of our size have, so that this mayor can strongly come out, create a plan for the restoration of safety. And now we have an opportunity through this charter change proposed by the Charter Commission to set things right for the people of Minneapolis, especially the people who need it most, my neighbors in North Minneapolis. Thank you.
Thanks. First slide, please. Yeah, it was great to hear from some of our city leaders about their support for changes to the city charter. This is really most important, as Don Samuels indicated, for people who can't buy services, for people most in need. We just simply can't have equity in our city if we don't have a city government that works for everyone. We really need a government that addresses the issues of our time. I'll talk a little bit about where we are now, the current status, and then Pat will talk about the proposed amendment by the City Charter Commission and what changes that would bring. Next slide, please. So why should we do it now? The events of 2020 really highlighted and demonstrated the urgent need to make city government work better so that we have a city that is just and safe for everyone. Minneapolis city government proved to be ill-equipped to provide a coordinated, strategic response and limit the damage following George Floyd's death. Our Charter Commission determined that this was a good time, and they spent a long months studying the current charter and talking to other cities and understanding better what changes we might make. And they have proposed a charter amendment that provides a path to address the critical issues facing our city and improving with the result of improving our city government. Next slide. So how do we get there? How do we get those changes made? Well, we think Charter for Change believes that what we need to do is vote for the Charter Commission's proposed amendment, because the effect of this charter amendment will make the city, and it clarifies the roles and responsibility of the mayor and the city council. It really provides a path to make our city government more accountable, more efficient, more responsible, and it provides the tools so we can have a reformed police department. Next slide. So what's the problem? I really like this, this cartoon. This was in the Star Tribune back in 2004. I think the title was "Who's in Charge?" And it clearly illustrates what the Charter Commission found this year when they studied city government after last year's civil unrest. This was the conclusion of the report provided by the Charter Commission. And I quote, "President Harry Truman famously quipped, 'The buck stops here.' In Minneapolis, the buck stops nowhere and yet everywhere, leading to organizational confusion, costly duplication of efforts, lack of centralized control and coordination, and especially under stress, this kind of stress we saw last year, chaos." Next slide. I think the city leaders talked about the 14 boss problem, and that's really what the Charter Commission found as they did their research. We have this 14 boss problem. We have the mayor, who's elected by about 435 residents of the entire city. And then we have 13 council members with wards of representing fewer than 34,000 residents. And those 14 bosses, if you will, give directions to department heads. And these departments heads have professional training, experience, and expertise. But the result is confusion and chaos because they have so many bosses giving them direction. Really, the substance of city government is providing city services. To get this job done, the direction of the staff is not rhetorical. It's really how the city works and what makes the city work. This is really most important for people in need. As I mentioned, those who can't afford to buy their own services. We won't solve the inequities of the city without this kind of change. Our current structure is harmful to the future of the city because it provides disincentive, if you will, for the recruitment and retention of qualified professionals to manage those various departments. In fact, in the last 2 years, 6 charter department heads have left the city during their appointed terms. 2 city coordinators, 1 public works director, the fire chief, community economic development director, and 2 budget officers. Former elected officials and charter department heads were all interviewed by the Charter Commission as they did their study, and they were unanimous in stating that our current structure lacks accountability, is overly complex, and is highly inefficient. And my hunch is also what causes increased expenses when we wouldn't need to have them. Next slide, please. A couple of examples of this 14 bosses problem that we've cited. During last year's civil unrest, some council members actually gave direct orders to police officers on the streets, which obviously contributed to the confusion. Who should they listen to? This council member who gives them instructions or the instructions they're getting from their leaders? In addition, some council members routinely give orders to department heads and staff, and they conflict with the city policies, but the councils are threatening retaliation. So the department head doesn't know what to do and the staff don't know what to do. Also in 2020, the council members stripped from the chief of police and the mayor key tools that would have enabled the kind of police reform that we all want. Next slide. So how did we get to this chaos? Why? Well, in 1920, Minneapolis voters opted for Minneapolis to be a home rule city. And that required under the that's the state constitution requirement, that we must have our own charter. So Minneapolis voters had a hard time getting a charter. They voted 6 times and couldn't quite do it. Finally, they did it, but they just took a lot of laws that the state were already on the state books and put them into our charter. So there wasn't really a very strategic, deliberative process to develop our charter. We all know that there are proposals on the ballot from time to time, actually fairly frequently. I've often been perplexed when I faced a ballot amendment a charter amendment on the ballot. So we've had a lot of changes over the years. Next slide, please. Also required as a home rule city, we're required to have a charter commission. And it's kind of our own think tank, let's look at it that way, to guide us in looking at the charter. In the next several months, my hunch is you'll be hearing a lot about the unelected city charter commission. But it's important to know that it's required by the state constitution, which sets up how it is staffed. The charter commission members are appointed by the chief judge of Hennepin County. There are 15 of them. They're all Minneapolis residents. Right now, we have 11 wards represented by 11 of the 13 wards represented by the Charter Commission. It's gender balanced, and there are 4 people of color. As I said, it really functions as a think tank because they spend all of their time looking at the charter and seeing how it's operating and looking at potential changes that could be made. I'll stop there and let Pat talk about how the Charter Commission's proposed amendment addresses many of these issues.
Thanks, Penny. Can we have the next slide? So I'm going to talk about the Charter Commission's recommendations. The Charter Commission amendment recommends a clear separation of the mayor's executive role from the council's legislative and oversight role. Next slide, please. Minneapolis has always had a mayor-council form of government. Here's an organizational chart, I'm sure easy to read for all of you. It was complex when I worked in Minneapolis, believe me. This comes from the city clerk's office. Each charter department head, in the boxes outlined in red, directs essential city services, solid waste, clean water, snow plowing, emergency response, police, fire, inspection, civil rights, and community planning. Minneapolis city government is a 1.5 billion enterprise with 3,800 employees. Who runs this enterprise? Well, both the mayor and the council have significant responsibilities, but with the sole exception of the police department, there's no one in charge of running this $1.5 billion enterprise, including all the other public safety functions that are needed to coordinate with the police department. There is no executive officer. Next slide. So here's the Charter Commission's proposed structure. All voters in the city elect the mayor, who would oversee operating departments. Then voters in each ward elect their council members, as they do today, who set city policy and have what we hope to be an expanded office of the city auditor at their disposal. This would be similar to the state legislative auditor that advises and supports the state legislature to monitor implementation of the policies and laws that they pass. Next slide. This is an illustration of a state and federal models of government. Many of us who are civic fans know these models. The Charter Commission's proposal is no power grab. Separating executive and legislative functions is modeled after our federal and state models with independent branches of government. Next slide. Duluth. The Charter Commission did consider Duluth, which is comparable to the structure of many large US cities, as well as the other larger cities in Minnesota, including St. Paul, Rochester, and Duluth. Here's an organizational chart for Duluth's city government. Next slide, please. The proposal creates a clear and balanced form of government. This proposal creates, the Charter Commission's proposal, proposed government structure clarifies the mayor and council's roles and responsibilities. Here, the mayor is the chief executive with responsibility and authority for implementing day-to-day administrative operations, supervising charter department heads, and ensuring the delivery of basic city services. City Council is the legislative and policy-making body responding to constituent needs for city services, ensuring the quality and fairness of delivery of city services, and providing oversight through the financial and performance audits performed by the city auditor. Next slide. But what does the Charter Commission proposed amendment do for us? The mayor, elected by all the voters in Minneapolis, has the authority and responsibility to provide city services that are better and equitable for everyone, and promotes a shared citywide agenda. Council members elected by their ward have the authority and responsibility to advocate for the delivery of quality and equitable city services to their ward, to perform oversight, just like our Congress does over our federal departments, and to work with the mayor to approve the budget for providing these services. Clear direction to department heads by the mayor ensures coordination, wiser spending of our dollars, and improved city services. Alignment of authority and responsibility ensures enhanced accountability. The people of the city will know who is responsible for getting the work of the city done. Public safety functions are consolidated, including prevention services, and coordinated under the administrative direction of the mayor, with the council retaining its policy role. And it retains the existing city charter requirements to have a police department. Next slide. This is the ballot language that was drafted by the Charter Commission and the City Attorney's Office. It will be submitted to the City Council, which has the final say, although the mayor can veto. I'll give you a minute to read this for yourself. Next slide. In November, there are likely to be other charter amendments on the city ballot in addition to this one. So we may have two rent stabilization proposals, the modern version of rent control. One would be to authorize rent control in the city, and the other would be to allow a limited initiative by citizens petition in the future. We may have two public safety proposals. I'm sure you've heard about both of them. And they're best understood visually. Both proposals continue the 14 boss problem, however. Next slide. I love these visuals, and I hope you do too. We want to show you the impact of these two public safety proposals, although they are really quite similar. This drawing illustrates the impact of the different public safety proposals. On the left, our current structure illustrates the 14 boss problem. The executive committee is the hiring authority for all department heads, including the police chief. Even though the police chief reports to the mayor and all public safety functions report to 14 bosses, all the other ones do, the city council and its public safety committee exert policy and budgetary oversight over the police. The result is a lack of accountability and complexity. This is the problem the Charter Commission's proposal is attempting to solve. In the middle, we illustrate the yes for Minneapolis and City Council public safety proposals. These proposals continue the 14 boss problem. They would remove the police department from the charter, create a new charter department of public safety, whose director reports to the mayor and the council 14 bosses. The council version would include a law enforcement division reporting to the new commissioner of public safety. The yes The Yes For petition proposal is similar, but provides licensed law enforcement only if necessary. The proposal would not give the mayor the necessary executive authority and responsibility for police reform or the coordination of public safety functions. On the right is the Charter Commission's proposal. This would solve the 14 boss problem. It would establish the mayor as the chief executive and maintain the council as the legislative body with expanded policy oversight. It clarifies that all public safety department heads would report to the mayor. This proposal would maintain official council action to shape policy and gives the mayor authority to implement the policy reforms. The integration of the public safety functions would create better structure, provide better coordination among programs, and lead to innovation and reform. If you want the police department reformed but not eliminated, the Charter Commission's proposal provides a path. To be clear, no charter amendment can do the following: give us a better contract between the City of Minneapolis and the Minneapolis Federation of Police. Our city leaders should and must negotiate that for us. None have the ability to end state laws requiring mandatory arbitration. Clearly a problem today. None have the ability to end qualified immunity required under federal law, but which would be ended by the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act under consideration in Congress right now. Next slide, please. Good questions to ask about any public safety proposal as you decide how you want the city to look in the future. Who's in charge? Will there be a police department? How many bosses for that police department? Who gives direction to the police chief in an emergency? And then who hires and fires the police chief? Next slide. So who supports the Charter Commission's proposed amendment? Citizens like you, Charter Commission members who voted unanimously in favor of this proposal. Many former council presidents and council members. Many former mayors. And many current and former Minneapolis department heads like myself. And the League of Women Voters. Next slide. The choice is yours. If you want a city that is just, safe, works for everybody, and a police department that's reformed but not eliminated. Next slide. If you want a city government that is more responsive, effective, and accountable, the Charter Commission's proposal provides a path. Next slide. To keep up to date on the Charter Amendments ballot questions, you can look at the city's website and the Charter Commission's website that will keep you up to date. And finally, in our last slide, mercifully, please visit our website, charterforchange.org. Share it with your friends and colleagues and neighbors. And we invite you to join us as a supporter and give us permission to list you as a supporter if you wish. Thanks very much for your patience, and Penny and I will do our best to answer your questions.
Pat and Penny. So just a reminder, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A function. I'll give folks a minute or two to populate their questions, but we did have one that came in while the two of you were speaking. So in the new format that the Charter Commission is recommending, would there still be a city coordinator role in that structure?
Well, I'll let Pat talk about that.
Yes, all the current department heads who are named in the city charter, including the city coordinator, will remain as they do today. They will simply be appointed by the mayor, subject to council confirmation, and report to the mayor which they do partially today, but not in whole today. So yes, the city coordinator stays.
And another question, so you kind of touched on this a bit in your proposal, but how does the Charter Commission's proposed changes ensure that the mayor is not given too much authority?
Well, I think as Pat said, this is not a power grab, but I'll let him elaborate on that.
Well, I think what's important in the new structure is that the city council retains its policymaking and oversight roles, which it has today. But what it doesn't have is a city auditor to do performance audits and financial audits, which I think are important in the oversight of not only departments, but the direction that they're receiving from the mayor. So I think that, but it's always subject to who's in office and how they exert the authority that's been given to them.
And then another question, I don't know if you actually had a number for it, but you touched on it in the presentation. Can you talk, are you sure of a number of how many other cities, major or otherwise, have a weak mayor system that's similar to ours?
I'll maybe pass this to Pat, but my understanding that our structure is quite unique as this Charter Commission looked at cities, organizations around the country. But Pat, you may have more information on that.
Well, I don't think the Charter Commission nor Penny and I have done any exhaustive examination of that question, but I think it's fair to say that of cities of the size of Minneapolis, virtually none of them have, although I can't say none, but virtually none of them have a structure like Minneapolis's, where the mayor has a very limited number of executive powers. It's very unusual. It's what we have in Minneapolis is very rare for a city of our size. Smaller cities in Minnesota use the city manager form of government, where the mayor is essentially a figurehead. Medium-sized cities in Minnesota, Duluth, Rochester, St. Cloud, mayors do have executive powers, even if they have strong city administrators or city managers.
We've gotten a couple of questions related to the auditor position. So can you just elaborate a little more on what that would look like? And then kind of a more specific one in that, presuming an internal audit would be part of this new function, would an independent internal audit oversight board remain?
I don't know, Pat, do you want to?
Sure, can I take a stab at that?
Sure.
There is an auditor position today. It reports to an audit committee that's appointed by the city council. In this proposal, under the Charter Commission's amendment, the city council could create its own audit committee. And so this auditor would report to this audit committee, and the audit committee would give direction to the auditor about what kinds of reviews are undertaken. The effectiveness, I would say the effectiveness of any auditor depends partly on who that person is and the resources that they are given under the city council's direction. So it is dependent upon personnel and resources and the direction that they get from the city council, but they would undertake to review, are policies working? Are they having the intended purpose? Are department heads responding to the mayor appropriately? Those are all kind of regular oversight functions that legislative bodies with their staff can perform and do perform at, for example, at the Minnesota legislature.
And one other question we got in is related to, are you able to explain a little bit more in this proposal why we would eliminate the executive committee?
Sure. Penny and I were talking about this last night, in fact.
Right.
Yeah. So under this proposal, the executive committee, which is the mayor and 4 council members, their role primarily today under the charter is to appoint these 8 or 9 charter department heads: police, fire, public works, city attorney, and so on. The mayor nominates candidates for those jobs, and the executive committee makes the appointment. When the appointment is made, then the city council then is asked to consent to those appointments. Under the Charter Commission's proposal, the executive committee's powers to appoint those 8 or 9 city charter department heads goes away, and the mayor is the appointing authority for those charter department heads. The executive committee is no longer the appointing authority. Likewise, whoever the appointing authority is can also unappoint. So the mayor then has hiring and firing responsibilities. Under the Charter Commission's proposal, the city council would still need to consent to those appointments as they do today. So the city council does still retain a role in approving those 8 or 9 appointments.
Thank you. So at this point, are there any current city council members that are supporting this specific charter amendment?
You know, that's a good question. I understand there are some, I do not know their names or the numbers. I guess Pat may know a bit more. I don't know.
I don't know. That's a great question, and I don't think Penny and I know.
It may become more apparent in the months to come, but
right.
You know, rumors are not necessarily true. So I see.
And I know you can only really speak to your group necessarily, but we've gotten a couple of questions in the chat of how Charter for Change and a new 612 are similar or different.
I guess I don't understand the question. 612.
A new 6, yeah, I think I would encourage people to, I think there is a fair amount of overlap and agreement about policy proposals that'll be in front of voters in Minneapolis. The Charter for Change group that Penny and I represent are simply doing our job to inform voters about the charter amendment and to advance the Charter Commission's amendment. We are not a political committee. We don't endorse candidates. I don't know if a new 612 is doing that, but I just encourage you to look at each of the websites and make the comparisons that you can make there. But there's a fair amount of overlap.
And I think potentially our last question, and Kate, unless others come in, you covered a lot of what the support for this amendment looks like in your presentation, but can you talk a little bit about, for the sake of balance, what kind of some of the opposition looks like, what those arguments look like?
I'll ask that question too. I'm sorry. Has opposition surfaced, specific opposition?
Well,
I'm sure it's there. I'm not.
Yeah. Let me try to answer it in this way. You all, this audience today, is our first audience.
Yes.
And so we haven't really tested this message. I'm sure the Charter Commission has heard opposition, but the Charter for Change group that Penny and I represent, you folks today are our inaugural group that we're speaking to. So, and
I'm taking notes on what we need to get some clarity on. So,
so I'm sure we will encounter opposition and questions to all or some of the Charter Commission's proposal here, but so far I think Penny and I have not yet fielded those kinds of questions. I'm sure we'll hear them.
No, the election, or the votes will take place in November is the voting, but actually early voting starts in mid-September. So I think we'll see interest in the charter amendments, this one and the other ones, increase over the coming months. And I think that will become clearer what the underlying issues are.
One more question that came in, and I know this is a complicated one, so you two may not be able to answer this, but we know that if this amendment were to pass, and then there are some conflicting pieces in some of the public safety proposals as well, that they inherently conflict. So do you have some thoughts about how that could potentially be remedied?
You know, you may have read several weeks ago that Barry Clegg, who's the head of the Charter Commission, indicated that for him, he does, for example, if the Charter Commission's amendment passes as well as the Yes for Minneapolis, that they can be meshed effectively. I guess that's what that may be something that's really decided in the future, but he's been pretty clear that those two can be meshed. I don't know, Pat, would you like to add something?
Yes, I've heard Barry say that too. And I assume that what would happen, if you go back to our slide that shows, don't do this right now, but if we were to look at that slide if both of these amendments pass, there would be a new public safety department, and it would be a charter department replacing the police department. That charter department head, that commissioner, would report to the mayor and be appointed by the mayor, subject to the city council's consent. So I think that's what Barry has in mind when he says they would merge those things. It wouldn't necessarily be the case that new public safety commissioner would report to all 14 bosses. They would report to the mayor.
All right, I think that covers all of the questions we had come in, and I'm certainly not opposed to giving folks time back in their day. So I think we'll close it out right here, unless Pat or Penny, you have anything else you want to say to close us out?
We just express our appreciation for letting us try this out on you all. I've taken notes of the questions that stumped Pat and me a little bit, and we'll take those back to Charter for Change and perhaps get more clarity for the next group, although I guess that won't help you all, but appreciate very much your time and attention. And I urge you during the coming months to really pay attention to these charter amendments that will be on the ballot and be ready to vote with knowledge when the time comes in the fall.
All right, well, thank you so much, Pat and Penny, and for all of you for joining us this morning. Please keep an eye on the New 612 website for more information and future events at new612.com. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day.